Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider presented by FanDuel. Matthew Coller here, and whew, man, let's all take a deep breath. The last couple days have been pretty wild. On Friday, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah gets fired, and then the slew of reporting, including from myself and Kevin Seifert and Alec Lewis and Diana Rossini and everybody and anybody else who had any inkling of what happened between the Minnesota Vikings and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. It is kind of hit like a Mack truck to the face of Minnesota Vikings fans over the last couple of days. And then we got, into this whole other world that I was kind of hoping it would not go into when it came to the parental leave issue. And then it was, is it this person's fault? Was it because of Sam Darnold making the Super Bowl? And on and on and on and on. And I'm sure as we reach here on Monday night that all of you folks are a little bit exhausted by the news cycle of the firing of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. Now, I promise you that the NFL will move on very quickly as we have the Super Bowl this week, but I also wanted to start that process of looking forward instead of looking back. Now, if you have questions and thoughts about what happened, I am here to answer them. And over the first hour, it's going to be a lot of you guys and your thoughts. And then Manny Hill comes in the second hour. Of course, you'll still be open to questions and comments when Manny joins as well. But I wanted to start thinking about what this means for Kevin O'Connell, what this means for the Vikings organization going forward, and how this reshapes the Minnesota Vikings offseason, if it does at all. I think that already we had gotten to a point where it felt like Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores had taken a lot of command of the Vikings organization. But now I think the biggest thing that is different is the fact that you have now Kevin O'Connell being really the guy who is completely in charge. That previously you had this duo, and I think we all thought that they were working in concert with each other, with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell. They were supposed to be creating a culture of communication and collaboration and all those buzzwords that we heard on the first days where they were hired, but that did not end up working out in the end because one of them is still here and now one of them is gone. And the biggest question for me is, what does Kevin O'Connell really want at quarterback? Because I think this falls into a couple of different potential categories, right? The first category would be that he wants to go with JJ McCarthy. And it's altogether possible that he was impressed by the progress of McCarthy last year in the second half of the season, that he feels like he doesn't want to be on that long list of organizations that fail players rather than players fail organizations, but that he believes that they need a better backup quarterback option. Now, that does remain on the table. It certainly does. That O'Connell still feels like there is a good chance that JJ McCarthy can get them to the playoffs and he could be the guy. Now, you can't, no matter what, go into next season feeling like, oh yeah, it's all set, no problems, don't need a quality backup. Hey, is Sam Howell still available? Let's go bring him back. No. I think everybody knows that that cannot be the case because of what happened last year. Be the Case Keenum. No, okay. But, Case Keenum was always the level of quarterback, for example, that if your starter got hurt, he could come in and still win a lot of games. Now, we thought that that was going to be Carson Wentz. It turned out it was really not Carson Wentz. So it is possible in this list of options of what Kevin O'Connell wants that he would want to go with JJ McCarthy, continue the development process, and then have a better backup quarterback option. I don't think that it's likely that that is what Kevin O'Connell wants, considering some of the things that were said by O'Connell, his opportunities to say JJ McCarthy is our quarterback and et cetera, the fact that McCarthy was not mentioned at all by the owner, the fact that, when he said highly competitive room does not sound like, yeah, I really believe in him, but I just wish I had, a little bit better of a backup quarterback. It doesn't really have that vibe to anything that we have heard so far from, this organization. It just has not come across that way. But I also do not want to count that out because, when we talk about like what Kevin O'Connell wants, very clearly, none of us are actually in the room. And right. I mean, so we don't know what those discussions are going to be like. And it may be possible that he thinks that McCarthy could build on it. That's option number one. Option number two is that O'Connell is going to be really true to his word and literal to his word. And that would mean, okay, a competitive room, meaning JJ McCarthy still has every chance to win this job, but he has to beat out player X. And as we go through who is player X, is it Mac Jones? Is it Geno Smith? Which I saw somebody throw out there today, and I thought, hey, that's a Purple Insider official idea. So that's mine. No, I'm just kidding. Like that's fine. But it makes a lot of sense, right? They're going to draft Fernando Mendoza, more likely than not. Geno Smith should be made available. He would compete with JJ McCarthy, but also he could throw the heck out of the football. He's going to push it downfield. It fits with what Kevin O'Connell wants to do offensively, because I don't think that O'Connell's going to go into this offseason and say, you know what I'd really like to do is create an offense that's all quick game. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. Explosive passes still rule the day. And I do think there's been some pretty clear signs from the coach hirings of bringing in Frank Smith, elevating Keith Carter, that they want to be a much more explosive run game. But we also know that the run is there to set up the pass, the downfield pass, and someone like Geno Smith would make a lot of sense. So that would be a contending, but could also be a starting quarterback. But it's not, hey, this guy's locked in as the starter. I think if I were to guess, that would be where Kevin O'Connell wants to land. If it is Mac Jones, if it is Geno Smith, that second category of, hey, we're going to give JJ McCarthy a chance to win this job. But if he doesn't win this job, then we still feel like we can win a lot of football games. That's where I think is the right place to land if there's any remaining belief in JJ McCarthy. And you guys have heard me reference EJ Manuel a number of times on the show because their statistics, McCarthy's and Manuel's, are so close. They both started 10 games and those numbers are very close. But in EJ Manuel's case, they did give him a chance to compete with Tyrod Taylor and Matt Castle in training camp. Now, he didn't win that job, but those are starting quarterback caliber players. Castle maybe one level down, but a guy who, won some games with New England and Kansas City. And then Tyrod Taylor, who got the Bills to the playoffs. That level of quarterback where if Manuel had been the real deal, then he would have beat them out. It turned out that he wasn't. And they were able to still have a fairly successful season that following year with Tyrod Taylor as their starter and get back to the playoffs eventually with him. I think ideally, now I'm not saying they should go get Tyrod. I don't think he's a great fit necessarily or is really a starting quarterback these days, but that caliber of player makes the most sense to me. Don't throw everything out just because of last season. Make sure you're still leaving that door open for JJ McCarthy. I would guess that Kevin O'Connell would at least want that he would at least want an opportunity. And you've seen like the photos, sometimes that meme online where it's like freshman year, sophomore year, and the person, it looks like they've aged, 15 years. That does happen with NFL players. That does happen with quarterbacks. You go away for the off season, you come back, you have matured, you have improved your technique, et cetera, your understanding of the offense, your leadership, how to handle all the pressure. Those were things that were thrown on JJ McCarthy to handle right away in the NFL that I think was a lot. It was a lot much for McCarthy to take on. But now him going into, not freshman year of college, but sophomore year, in this comparison, second year of potentially starting, there is a chance that he can make big progress. And I think you want to leave that door open and not just completely shut it and say, sorry, we've got a different starter, no chance, goodbye. There's the other one, and that is to just get a starting quarterback and you're done with JJ McCarthy. Now, the reason that that's possible is it really ties into this whole thing. Does the firing of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah mean that Kevin O'Connell is now sort of knighted and he is the face of the franchise? He's running the franchise. He's the guy that the Wilfs fully believe in. They want him to be the coach for another 10 years. Or does it mean, all right, one guy is gone, and if this doesn't turn around instantly, two guys will be gone? I tend to think, based on the Wilfs' history, that it's the latter. I was just looking at this last night because I was writing about how over purpleinsider.football, the newsletter, I was writing about how, hey, it's your show now, Kevin O'Connell, and kind of what a mystery O'Connell is as a head coach, where he gets so much out of the 2022 team, turns around the culture, has things fall apart in 23 with the backup quarterbacks, has so much out of Sam Darnold in 24, coach of the year, then has this setback, not being able to get the most out of a quarterback, and sort of the shortcomings end up shining when you don't have a Tom Brady or you don't have a Peyton Manning as your quarterback. And so we now know, and the Wilfs know, and everyone else, like these are all the things that you haven't succeeded at yet so far in your coaching career, and et cetera, where it feels like on the given date, you could ask someone, where does Kevin O'Connell rank among head coaches? And if you picked a calendar date, let's go with 2022, October 23rd, people would be like, man, top 7? He's doing an amazing job. And then if you went to right after the playoff game and they lose to the Giants, you'd go, I don't know, top 18. 2023, by the end of after Josh Dobbs, you'd say, man, this guy's a top 10 coach, top 5. End of the season, tush push with Brandon Powell, games they melted down in, pitching the ball to Josh Dobbs, not running against the Bears, things like that. Maybe he's top 20. 2014, he's number 1 coach of the year. And then this last year, it's a lot of criticism for the decision to go with JJ McCarthy, to not have a great backup option, to not be able to develop McCarthy on the fly. And now I don't even know. Like, what are we supposed to think about Kevin O'Connell? It's an interesting debate that goes round and round, because some of you will say he should be fired, and others will say all he needs is a good quarterback and his culture's great. And where do the Wilfs stand on that? Because it is a little bit perplexing sometimes, and I think it always comes back to just the quarterback position and whether they can get the running back to get explosive plays. I mean, I think that it was a mistake to bring back Aaron Jones, as much as I appreciate him. And I'll always say that after, because I never want to disrespect Aaron Jones, but he didn't have the same juice as he did at the beginning of last year. So they didn't create explosive run plays. They didn't stay healthy as an offensive line, which cost them. They didn't develop any backup offensive linemen who were ready to step in, and that cost them, right? So their receivers didn't catch passes. TJ Hawkinson had to chip all the time because of Darius. Like, there's all these things, there's all these moving parts. We always want to make it so simple with, is this guy good or crap? Like, which is he? And we do that with quarterbacks. That might be how you end up with Sam Darnold as a Seattle Seahawk. So he's good now, but he was good before, then crap, then good. Like, no, he was probably always way better than he looked in Carolina and New York, and maybe not as great as he looked at times when he was pulling out magic stuff to get them to the playoffs. And then now that he's supported by a great team, he's able to make the Super Bowl, right? So coaches are just as complicated as quarterbacks. That's my point. So do the Wilfs feel like KOC is great and we want him to be Andy Reid? We want him to be here for a long freaking time. Or do they think, we're not really sure either. We're still trying to figure this out. In that case, and the history I mentioned, Brad Childress has 2009, 2010 comes along, he's fired. Les Frazier makes the playoffs on the last day of the season by beating the Green Bay Packers in 2012. 2013 comes along, he's fired. Mike Zimmer wins a playoff game in 2019. 2020 was just a preposterous year all around. At 2021, though, you see where I'm getting at this? Zimmer got 2 years after his peak season. Childress got 1, and Les Frazier got 1. Mike Tice was fired with a winning record, just like Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. I guess they have that in common now, that Tice went 9-7 and was let go from his position a couple of years after their peak season. So the Wilfs have not been super patient with these coaches. After they kind of set a bar at a certain place, then if it doesn't stay there, they tend to not continue to have their jobs. But is that different for O'Connell? And here's where it ties into Kevin O'Connell's approach. Is Kevin O'Connell's approach to this offseason option number 3, which is I better get a starting quarterback and whatever happens to JJ McCarthy happens to JJ McCarthy. And we'll see somewhere down the road, but I better get a real starting quarterback. And that's where names like Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, Kyler Murray, if you guys got other ones, I'm listening, but other starting quarterbacks, guys you bring in from day one of OTAs, mini camp, training camp, they're the guy. JJ McCarthy is carrying their Gatorade and hand it to him and holding the clipboard and saying, let me help you with the scout team. Is that the case? And what they do at quarterback, I think, is going to tell us a lot, because I've thought this about general manager too, but what they do at quarterback is also going to tell us a lot about what they think of Kevin O'Connell or what he thinks of his own job security. Because if you had really good job security as Kevin O'Connell, which I don't think is insane, and I've told you guys before, there's something like, I saw it from Mike Clay of ESPN, friend of the show. I saw him say that there's 21 new offensive coordinators in the NFL. There's only 32 teams. What? That can't be good. That can't be good to be hiring and firing and changing systems and changing cultures and all the time. It's very, very hard to get ahead if that's what you're doing, right? So I'm not for reactionary fires for, oh, well, if you win this week, you're in. And if you lose this week, you're out. And, the Ravens owner claimed that that's not what he did. I have a tough time believing that. If the Ravens had made the field goal, gone to the playoffs, won a playoff game, are you telling me they were still going to fire John Harbaugh? That seems far-fetched to me. So if you're doing stuff like just firing based on, well, we won this game or didn't win that game, so you're out or you're in, I don't think that's smart business. Not that, this is their playground for the billionaires, so not that they're always required to be totally rational, but that's not a good way to do it. So if O'Connell feels like there is immense pressure, and I tend to think that looking at the rest of the NFL, there is. Looking at the way that owners are judging their coaches and their general managers, it feels like, hey, one season goes wrong and you could be toast. That to me says that there could be a starting quarterback on the way. Somebody with a lot of experience. The other day we talked about the possibility of Kirk Cousins coming back. And I said, hey, if you're doing that for Kirk to be the backup to McCarthy, and then if things go completely wrong, okay, I guess go to Kirk. But is Kirk really coming back without any promises of being the starting quarterback? That seems unlikely. And also his accuracy, his knowledge, his chemistry with Justin Jefferson, it all screams Kirk would probably be the starter. Aaron Rodgers is another one where they talked last year. Rodgers got a team to the playoffs. He was far from perfect, but he got a team there. Are you now looking at, hey, we could bring back Rodgers, and that's one that you can kind of sell as this is an all-time great quarterback, so we're going to bring him in. We should have done it last year, but you know what? Gosh dang it, we're doing it now. I don't know why I just turned KOC into Phillip Rivers, but dadgummit, we're doing it now. Why not? And you go out and you get Rodgers. I'm not for this plan, by the way, but I think it's possible. Get Rodgers, try to get to the playoffs, see if you can develop McCarthy behind the scenes if you can't draft another quarterback later, and then I don't know. Because if you don't get to step A, then you don't ever get to see step B. It's kind of like how the Vikings traded down a few times in this last draft to pick up future capital, and then Kwesi Adofo-Mensah never got to use it. I know, insert your jokes here, but you get my point. If you just get to a certain point and you fail because you've put too much on McCarthy's plate again, or too much on his, betting on him again, then you ain't going to get to see the next possibility for what you do at quarterback down the road. That's why I think that it's something that is very, very possible. And the Kyler Murray idea gets brought up a lot because of that, because this is a quarterback who's played a lot and won a lot, but Rodgers lingers. Is he going to retire? Is he going to keep playing? Could KOC talk him into it this time? What's his relationship with Mike McCarthy? Is he going to go back and play in Pittsburgh again? I do feel like the Vikings have a better offense than Pittsburgh, but is he going to go play with Mike McCarthy again? That seems kind of unlikely to me. So there's all these things swirling in the air, but the quarterback decision will tell us a lot about how Kevin O'Connell feels about his own job security and his own future, and about the possibility that JJ McCarthy can turn things around. The rest of the roster, now on defense, I think that Brian Flores needs a sprucing of the defense, but I certainly don't think that he needs to blow up the defense. Last year, they may have gotten a little bit cute, moving on from Harrison Phillips and Mekhi Blackmon. You don't need to do that necessarily again, although ultimately the D-line ended up working out and they had a good run defense overall. But early in the season, they definitely could have used that, could have used a little more on the depth side. But I mean, okay, if Harrison Smith retires, you're looking for a safety, but they're bringing back almost everything from the front seven. If they can get Eric Wilson to come back, and you're only talking about a couple pieces, so you can really lock in what you think you have there. You're looking for more depth. You're really looking for more Eric Wilsons, honestly. And as an aside, it's kind of proof about spending versus being savvy in free agency, that the best signings were Isaiah Rodgers and Eric Wilson, who didn't cost that much. But on the offensive side of the ball, there's way more questions. What are you doing at center? What are you doing with Addison? What are you doing with Jalen Naylor? Is he going to hit the free agent market? And I think the most important one might be, what are you doing in that backfield? And can you create enough of a run game if you're Kevin O'Connell to bail yourself out if the quarterback situation isn't great? Because this year, the run game was fine. At the end of the day, they finished as a run team something like 12th in EPA per carry. It was fine. But fine doesn't make up for poor quarterback play. So if you have struggles with quarterback play, can you get over the hump with your running game, which I think is how he wants to try to insulate himself based on some of the hires that have been made, and moving up Keith Carter, who was rooted in the outside zone system with Derrick Henry. So that's a lot. Now I want your guys' thoughts, questions, comments on where they go from here is really the question. Because it all zooms in on Kevin O'Connell and his future and how they approach the quarterback position. And then they can, branch out from there. When we get to the draft and we get to free agency, now this is another interesting thing. And then we'll get to your comments here very shortly, because the draft, well, I mean, would it be out of the realm of possibility to have a bleep them picks situation with the draft? I don't think so, when you consider just like the desperation of trying to get back into the playoffs. I mean, why would they sit around and wait for, a bunch of draft picks to develop when they could potentially spend some of that draft capital going out and, getting a player, for example, for a draft pick or something like that, right? Like that they could do, they could make a move that's more along the lines for a player. They could draft players that they think can help them now and fill spots. And you have Rob Brzezinski, and this goes for the free agency approach. You have Rob Brzezinski, who was really the orchestrator of how this organization was able to fit in a whole bunch of free agents and signings back when Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman were desperate. This is the numbers guy. This is someone who has really brilliantly managed his part of the organization for a very long time. So do they move a bunch of money down the road to sign free agents, to sign somebody like just Breece Hall, for example, who I think would be a great signing? If they do that, like, is that good for the long term of the organization? Probably not, but it will show us, well, they feel like they really got to win now. So at all layers of this thing, it starts with, of course, the quarterback, and then down and down and down to free agency, to the draft and how they approach all these things. And what will this is the crazy part, right? What will the next general manager, if it's from the outside, what are they going to be inheriting? Because today is Groundhog's Day. Does any of this sound like Groundhog's Day to you guys? Because it certainly sounds a little like Groundhog's Day to me. It sounds like, let's see, kicking money down the road, drafting for need, quarterback uncertainty, spending to fill immediate stuff, and causing maybe potential issues with draft capital and salary cap space for the next general manager. Yeah, all that stuff sounds actually like I went back in time. So how are they going to make it different is really, really the question. So, all right. Well, there's my thoughts. And let me get you a FanDuel question of the day. Speaking of coaches, I'm curious who you guys think the coach of the year should be. On FanDuel right now, Mike Vrabel is by far the favorite at -750, then Mike McDonald plus 550, and everybody else is nowhere close. Kyle Shanahan plus 4,500, Ben Johnson plus 8,000, and Liam Cohen plus 10,000, which reminds me of The Office, where didn't Kevin Malone say something like, if anything is ever 100,000 to 1, I'll bet it. So maybe that's your Liam Cohen pick, but who do you think was deserving of this year's Coach of the Year award? And you can check out those odds on FanDuel. Okay, let's get to your questions, comments, and thoughts. And we'll start back at the top. So, Tom, very funny. Hey guys, I've been offline since Thursday. How was Kwesi's time at the Senior Bowl? Very funny, Tom. Very funny. Seabakes, at least you don't have to worry about a boring off season for reporting. That is absolutely true, my friend. You were right about that. And not that I would ever think that it would be, just considering the Minnesota Vikings always find a way to be interesting. That is for darn sure. Matt says, what are the odds that JJ is even on the team next season? It would not be beyond the realm of possibility to trade JJ McCarthy, because if we look at some of the past issues that quarterbacks have had as high draft picks, they do get traded sometimes. Sam Darnold was one of them, and Josh Rosen is maybe the most famous, where the Cardinals put out a Josh is our quarterback thing on their Twitter, and then they traded him. Those were both second round picks, by the way. I don't think that's impossible. And one guy had a rumor that they were trying to trade him last year. I'm not so sure about that, if that happened or not. But, everybody hears different things. Is it impossible that they would trade him? No, it's not impossible, because there are a lot of teams that are looking for what they're going to do at quarterback. There is a lot of teams in the NFL that are uncertain at their quarterback positions. And if somebody was willing to toss a second round pick at you because they thought, well, we don't really have an option, let's just see if there's anything there with JJ McCarthy. If the Vikings were completely done and they had some other option that they thought was much better, and they wanted to get more draft capital for right away to help them out with their roster, that to me would be very reactionary. But also, you have a full year of Kevin O'Connell working with JJ McCarthy. And if that's what he feels is necessary, I know, like last year, it made more sense to say, hey, I just trust KOC. Now, maybe it makes less sense to just say, I trust KOC because, events that have happened with Sam Darnold and so forth, and missing on that, making that mistake. But I still think that if your head coach, who you've invested this amount of power in, if they don't want to go forward with this quarterback, then you don't go forward with this quarterback. And then JJ McCarthy will be in the Super Bowl in 2027. C-Bake says, I've heard it said in the past that Rob Brzezinski was not interested in the GM job and enjoyed his behind the scenes capacity. Do you suspect this has changed and that he would be interested in the GM job? So I have known Rob a long time, but I can't say that he's ever said, you know what, Matthew, I'm going to share this with you and only you. Put his arm around me. I would love to be GM. No, I don't know. I don't know. What I do know is that he's qualified, and what I do know is that he's respected. Rob Brzezinski, you will never hear anybody say anything negative about Rob Brzezinski. Agents, people around the league, he has been so involved in this organization for a really, really long time, negotiating things, draft day. I believe that he's been one of the guys that is on the phone on draft day, working on trades, a trusted right-hand man for Rick Spielman, and even going way, way back, trusted by the Wilfs. I mean, this is somebody that, it deserves a shot at GM if he wants it. At the same time, my only issue with Rob Brzezinski, it's not about who he is or where he comes from, the fact that he's already in-house or anything like that, because he deserves it. The only concern I would have about Rob Brzezinski taking over as GM is just that what I would want from the general manager position is someone who can objectively come in and see everything with new eyes, with fresh eyes, and decide, is this a winning head coach? Is this a winning situation, a power structure, the front office? I will still go back to time and time again, and it's been a little refreshing to not look back and only look forward over the last 30 minutes, but I will still go back to, if you're going to hire someone who's different and from a different world and very unique, then you need to also allow for that person to build the front office to be different and unique, not keep a lot of the front office together. And I know that you folks have brought this up, over the years. Like, do you think it's the scouts and things like that? And again, I'm not in the room with these people, so it's very hard to say. But now that we know kind of the results and what they were rooted in, we can pretty clearly say, I think, that it was problematic to have someone from a different background come in and have to try to win over a bunch of people that, look, Rick Spielman had his shortcomings, but he was liked by a lot of people in the building as the leader of the organization. So I think that was always a challenge for him. If you're hiring a new general manager, let them bring their own luggage. And I'm sorry to people in the organization, it's a ruthless business, at least a lot of their own luggage. I'm not saying clear out every single person, but let them build their own leadership group who can evaluate the head coach, the defensive coordinator, the culture, the relationship with the training staff and the everything, right? From top to bottom. Let them do that. Aaron says, draft a running back or sign a free agent. What's your preference? Draft sim tonight. I don't know if I'm going to get in a draft sim tonight, but trust me, they're coming. I got to catch up. This really derailed my usual schedule of starting to catch up on what's going on in the draft starting with the Senior Bowl. So I really was pretty far into stuff with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the firing and did not really get a chance to focus on, well, here's who I thought was great at the Senior Bowl. I mean, I just haven't been able to do that since it's been such incredible madness over the last couple days. But we'll get there. We'll get to more draft simming. But to your point about the running back position, in theory, the idea of drafting one makes more sense than the idea of bringing in a free agent, just because it's less tread on the tires. It's a younger player. But when you have Javonte Williams out there, when you have Breece Hall out there, if you're telling me, hey, take that big swing, go get that big free agent running back, this has worked pretty well in recent history to get the big free agent running back. That's the Saquon Barkley thing. And I mean, could Breece Hall be that, where he leaves a horrific organization to come to a good one, to come to an offensive line that's mostly built? I really like throwing some of the bag at Breece Hall. I think that's a good idea. But if you're drafting one in the second round, this is a position that can start quickly, which not every position is, but that one certainly is a position that can start right away. My concern would be the pass protection. If CJ Ham's going to retire, what are you going to do in pass pro? Because we've seen Jordan Mason, Ty Chandler, these guys just get throttled when it came to the pass pro. So you need somebody who knows how to do it in this offense, because I think it puts a lot on the running back. Tom says, I think one of the things I'm concerned about is the decreased time for drafting on draft day. Will be interesting to see the draft room videos when they come out. So yeah, I mean, trying to speed up a little bit. Well, look, the last time they let the clock run out, they ended up with Kevin Williams. Maybe it's a good strategy. I'm just kidding. You're right, though. Those decisions, who is it Brzezinski running the operation? I would assume that he is, and he's been in that room so many times over the years. Like, he knows how to do it. But now, like, is Kevin O'Connell the one who's saying, this is who we're drafting, and make that pick? Now, the NFL does not really work the way we think it does, where when the board falls, they go, who do we want to pick? They usually have all the scenarios played out, and then they get to that point and they make the decision that they already anticipated. They know better than any of us. I knew a scout who had, I think, picked like the first 20 selections right in the draft a couple years ago, because they have more intel than we do or any of the draft analysts. I mean, clearly, since they thought Shadur was going in the first round, but they have more information that they get inside the building about character concerns that might drop guys who are going to go higher than anybody on the outside thinks. And believe it or not, they usually don't tell the reporters, because you never tell people who you're going to draft. In fact, an executive for a team last year told me at the combine, just having a little conversation when I was hanging out, that they had told some reporters names of players that they didn't like. And they said, yeah, we're big on this guy. Just on purpose to try to get different information out there. So that's a rant you didn't need. But in terms of inside the draft room, that dynamic now changes. And it would seem to me that the final call, if it comes down to two players, do we trade down? Do we take this? That those final calls are going to come down to Kevin O'Connell now. And not any discussion. Well, clearly there's not a discussion there, but Brzezinski's going to make it happen. But it's going to come down to O'Connell being the one to make that call. Brent says, have you heard explicitly that Kwesi did not have the final say on some of these decisions? I'm skeptical about how collaborative some decisions were. What I was told is that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and his final say by the end had been reduced. That the amount of power that he was wielding in the final say of decisions was not the same as when he first got there. It was always supposed to be a collaborative thing. It was always supposed to be a consensus thing. But when you have Flores and O'Connell and coaches that had, I think, put in more work. Alec Lewis had mentioned in his article that after they botched that first draft, that there was like an army of Vikings coaches who were out on the road doing work for that next draft in 2023 and so forth. So you have, I think, a lot of the decisions that were getting made were being by the time you got to the 2025 offseason, were being more pushed forward by the coaches. I'll give you just, one example, Jonathan Allen, who turned out to be, I think a helpful signing for the Vikings. The price was much more than it needed to be. But my understanding was there was some disagreement there of, the price and is it worth it? And, Flores wanting interior pressure, but the person who came from Wall Street, not necessarily. And I can't say what everybody said. It's just one of those examples of, hey, when you look at this guy's numbers, when you look at the data of this, particular player, do you really see someone who's worth that much money? And the coaches were winning out in these debates. That's how I understood it, that by the end, that was how it was going. But in terms of like not having final say, I think he was having final say before that. Leonard says, competence isn't a buzzword, but it's what I want. Competence, yes. They're going to need, I think, more than competence, though. I think they're going to need some brilliance thrown in here in order to get out of this situation when it comes to facing off with the NFC North. These other teams know what they want. LaFleur stays around. Their general manager has been there. They know what they're doing in Green Bay. And the Lions know what they're doing. If they can fix their offensive line, they're going to be back to being the Lions. And I think they got a good offensive coordinator. The Chicago Bears know exactly what they're doing. They're going to every free agent and saying, you want to be a Bear and play with Caleb Williams? And I think there's going to be more yeses than there's ever been there. JP says, how do you take Jefferson's assessment that the Vikings would have done better with Darnold? It's obvious, but does saying out loud mean JJ is gone? Yeah, the thing about Justin Jefferson, having interviewed him many times, every Thursday we talk with him at the podium, is Justin is a real people person who I think always tries to give answers earnestly. And sometimes that has led here or there to Justin, I want to say being taken advantage of, but Justin like giving answers that are maybe a little more earnest than you would like from the most PR trained athlete. I mean, to him, that would just be an obvious statement. It was like a couple years ago, somebody asked him to rank quarterbacks in the league. And he's like, well, Burrow or whatever. Like, I mean, he'll just do that. Like, he's a very friendly person who I think always wants to give a good interview and will answer the questions as they come. And he's an honest guy. I mean, if you ask Justin Jefferson, hey, would you guys have been better with Sam Darnold? It's like, obviously. I mean, he knows, and and everyone else knows that they had some of the worst quarterback play in the league. There is a PR answer to that, which is, oh, come on, that's not fair. And we're really happy with JJ McCarthy and we can't wait to see what's next for him. So we're happy for Sam. We're happy to have JJ and, we're going to prove everybody wrong next year. That's the PR answer, but he's not like that. Like, he's not like a calculated type of person naturally, I think. So if you ask, I mean, it's to him, I don't mean to speak too much for him, just interview experience with him. I don't think he is capable of that level of BSing you. I really don't. And yeah, I mean, of course they would have been better with Sam Darnold. I think that there's about 47 things that are more telling about where they're at with JJ McCarthy than that. But yeah, I mean, Jonathan Grenard tweeting the dots out and stuff like that. Like, there's a lot of things, every comment made by Kevin O'Connell in like the last 8 weeks of the season, almost. There's a lot there that says they're not really feeling like JJ McCarthy is their franchise quarterback. But at the same time, like, things change really quickly. And that's, Carolina, for example, is now very, very likely to sign Bryce Young to a 5th-year option. If you ask that at the beginning of, last season, 2024, if you said, hey, do you think Carolina will sign Bryce Young to a extension or a 5th-year option? You'd be like, what? That guy who can't even complete a pass? Are you joking? So things do change in the NFL. Feelings about certain players change. But I mean, for Justin, it's just an obvious answer. Of course they would have been. He's in the Super Bowl. He won 14 more games. Yeah, they would have been better. Rach says Jefferson's contract makes trading him very difficult, at least for this year. If they really wanted to do that, then they could. If he really wanted to be traded, like, what you're saying is not untrue. It is true. But if they really wanted to do something like that, they could. It would be a terrible decision because Justin Jefferson will continue to be good at football past whatever quarterbacks they're going to get. Justin Jefferson, though, is something that when we talk about how KOC views all of this, that does need to be factored, though. Absolutely needs to be factored in the discussion. Is they need to find someone to make sure that Justin Jefferson is at 1,500 plus yards, not barely trying to get to 1,000 in the last day of the season. It has to be a factor because last year he was the good soldier. He was super patient. He was very understanding. I don't think he'll be that way this year. And that's not on him. That's on them. 2 Coke cans every time. Every time. I'm going to laugh when I read that. Let's be clear. KOC is the one who's been putting all of this garbage out there since the end of 2023. Let's not forget he himself was the QB killer. Did he kill the idea of JJ McCarthy? Well, I don't know that that's fair to... You guys are funny. I don't think that that's fair to say that we know who put what out there when. The thing about like them not necessarily gelling with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah coming from a different world with the front office, this has been something that's been bubbling for a long time. And I will be asked reasonably by you guys, well, hey, why didn't you say that? Why didn't you bring it up? Because they gave him an extension. They won 14 games. They executed the plan that they had aimed to get after. And over the years, you hear about headbutting all the time and trying to figure out what's right, what's wrong. Is there something really to this? Is this people with an agenda, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, if you just said every single thing from every conversation that, maybe somebody might just be venting about frustrations, then you're going to run out and say it. Like, you don't really know. If it's been going on since 2023 with concerns about him and his leadership of the organization, which I think is probably the case, they won a lot of football games the following season. If you said it then, if you said, hey, there's this parental leave thing that's got some people all worked up, and then they won 14 games and everybody looked like they're on the same page, I mean, you look pretty silly, right? So I think when you get to the end and they make the decision, then it's, okay, now some of this stuff that you connect dots and now this makes sense when I heard this or when I was told that. Okay, now I get it, right? That is kind of how it works, because you don't want to be a rumor mongerer here, especially in a world where if you say anything, it's going to be grabbed and picked up and spread everywhere. So it's better, I think, to try to sift through that information. I would also say, though, too, when Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was... I'll go back to the end of 2023. I had Kevin Seifert on the show, and I said to Kevin, what do you make of the stuff, that's out there about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and his connection with the front office? I asked him that question, and he answered that question. There, you could see it. It's on YouTube. It's out there. So it's not like this had never been brought up. And I mentioned Pro Football Talk. They had their thing about how it wasn't KOC's fault that they messed up the quarterback situation a couple weeks ago, which made me raise an eyebrow of like, okay, but I would say that if you're an NFL head coach, it probably means you know how to play the game behind the scenes. I will not disagree with you there if that's what you're insinuating. Are the Wolves getting Giannis? I'm going to go on record and say, that I don't love that. I think complete teams win championships, but I'm also a football person. Steven says explosive run game means they would need an explosive running back, which means saying goodbye to Aaron Jones. Yeah, I do agree that that's what probably has to be done here. Angel Dust says, my wife is giving birth. I guess I'm fired. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I'm not going to get into that every single night because that's become like a huge thing. I talked about it yesterday. What I will say is, every culture in every workplace has different ways of doing things within their building, and the NFL is no different. So there are certain things wherever you work, and I'll give you an example. If you are a person who, in our world, in the beat reporter world, doesn't come to everything, sort of shows up when you want, and then write stuff that isn't that informed, but whatever, we're going to go, are you really part of this world, or are you kind of different? So if you do anything, and I bet you could name that, I mean, for anything, right? For absolutely anything. If you were, when I worked at a grocery store, if you were the person that walked around looking at your phone the whole time when it was Christmas Eve and there was work to be done, we'd look at you and be like, what are we doing here? Right? Because there's a way of doing things within that. There is a way of doing things in the NFL where people who maybe step outside that culture or don't have the same background where it's going to be looked at a little differently. So, people who made it out to be, the Vikings are monsters or whatever else over that. If you talk to players and you talk to coaches and you talk to front office people, sacrifice is really rooted in this thing when it comes to families and moments and stuff like that. And you could see why, even though I think it's totally right that parents should get time with their children and stuff like that, that it would frustrate some people or make it seem like, we already thought you were an outsider. Now we really think that since you're doing this. And what I reported was a little different because I didn't want to go into that whole thing. I know how complicated that is. I know how not everybody will understand. And they'll think it's, as you said, that it's BS and whatever else, which is fine. Like, is it right? No, I didn't say it was right. But there were, it seemed, some issues with communication during that time from what I had understood. If you're not around in your office at the building during a very pivotal time, it certainly makes it a lot harder. So, that's all. I think it shaped some opinions. And like I said, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That is kind of the facts, and their culture is different than yours. Let's see. Roderick with a G thrown in. You said Geno Smith and I almost threw up. So here's the funny thing about Geno Smith is that if you look at 2024 and you go to PFF and you search big time throws, you are going to see that Geno Smith was elite and won 10 games for his team with a lot of big time throws. He has got the arm to do this. Is he a frustrating quarterback? Will he get sacked too much? Yeah. But I don't think that what he did with the Raiders is at all reflective of Geno Smith's peak with Justin Jefferson versus the garbage fire that was the Raiders last year. Oh, and 2 Coke cans asked about, did KOC kill the idea of JJ McCarthy? I mean, these are all things where you're trying to figure out, well, who thinks what, who's responsible for what, who wants what. I think Kevin O'Connell wanted JJ McCarthy to be his guy for 10 years. But if you get someone in the building as a quarterback and you start to realize that maybe that chemistry that you dreamed of and maybe that connection that you dreamed of, and maybe you in the backyard throwing the ball around saying, little JJ, you're supposed to throw it this way with the right technique. And he goes, okay, KOC, and then becomes wildly prolific. That just didn't happen this year. And then when McCarthy said that he'll dance into the end zone if he wants to or something, I mean, more or less, it was like, oh, okay. So even though that's a little thing and I don't remember making a huge deal out of it, I thought if you're not going to be the video game player with your coach has the controller in this offense, is if you're not going to follow what your coach says for you to do, you're probably not going to succeed for one, but also how can O'Connell know? And when you're going to commit a taunting penalty, when you're not going to tell him when he's injured, like those things, they need to be as thick as it gets. Like they need to be in lockstep. Did not really feel that way. When you feel the need to tell everyone that you're dumbing down the offense and feel the need to tell everyone you're not teaching techniques, which I'm sure they were still teaching throwing technique, but still like come out and say that. There was just a lot of things that made you go, does that sound like Mahomes and Andy Reid talk to each other? Does that sound like Vrabel and Drake May? Does it sound like Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams? Like, not really. Doesn't really sound like there's the connection there. We're going to find out, though. That's my point of where I started the show. We're going to find out. C-Bake's Geno option is probably the best on the table right now to bring in someone who can actually start without spending draft capital and still gives fair opportunity to compete for JJ. Yep, that's my logic on that. That would be my logic. Steven says Kirk is another option for bringing in someone who knows the offense but wouldn't require draft capital investment. That is only if they are okay with having Kirk compete and he's okay with it for the spot. If he's only coming back if he's QB1, then I don't love it. Matt says, I would not sign a worse quarterback to give JJ a better chance to compete. Bring in the best guys you can. That I agree with. Bring in the best quarterback you possibly can. Maybe there's something up his sleeve. Maybe there's a swing that we don't know about, a quarterback that's a backup somewhere that they loved when they scouted, or something that we're not aware of. I was thinking of, like, I don't know, Drew Lock or something. Would he take a shot? I don't know what Drew Lock's situation is, but would he take a shot at Drew Lock and then someone else and create this? I just mentioned the Tyrod Taylor, Matt Castle, EJ Manuel, which I know is not exactly a QB competition for the ages, but that was a team's approach. Let's bring in 3 guys and see what happens. They could also do something like that. But overall, I generally agree. The best football player, like, let's not make this overly complicated. Get the best football player you can, who can win you the most games if they play, and roll the football out and see what happens. And if McCarthy beats out that guy, like, let's say it's Murray, beats out that guy, well, then great. And you could trade him or keep him or whatever you want to do. But if you're talking about trying to set up the competition on purpose so he wins, pretty sure that's what eventually ended up happening last year. Rach says, I'd be fine with saying goodbye to McCarthy. Frankly speaking, he made the team a laughing stock of the league. I don't think you're being too harsh that quarterbacks with this kind of performance through a sample size of 10, even 10 starts, but especially 2 years. You've really been here for 2 years. They rarely stay. And I've looked at all of them over the last 15 years. Unless you're a top 3 to 5 draft pick, they rarely stay if they perform like this. But even more so, you're right about, the 9 stuff and, just some of the things that got talked about a lot. I didn't really like how much he got made fun of for that, because it feels like if he was good, no one would care. But it also just feels that he was kind of missing a little awareness in a lot of different ways. And quarterbacks like that usually don't stick around too much either. 2 Coke cans says KOC. I might just call you Toucan. Says that he was upset about McCarthy for parental leave. Now, he certainly brought it up more times than I would have expected. And the way that I initially had viewed that was that it was making an excuse for JJ more than anything. But then he brought it up repeatedly, which made you wonder about, like, was he not happy about that? So yeah, that's fair to bring up. Steven says if a head coach doesn't make the playoffs for consecutive seasons in Minnesota, they're gone. KOC has to at least make the playoffs in 2026 or else. You're right. From a historical perspective, that has mostly been the case. There was probably a little bit more patience for Zim in 2020 to 2021 because they had to take down the whole team. And also, I mean, the pandemic, the no fans, it was the most miserable year of anybody's life. At least recently, right? In this cycle of covering the NFL for me, it was the most miserable year for reporters, for players, for coaches. Nobody even talks about it ever because it was just so terrible. And that's, goes kind of for all of society as well. Just awful. And I think that they were understanding of, well, things went wrong there, but let's give them another shot. You're right, though. When you go back through the history with this ownership, going back to, 2005, you'd be hard pressed to find them not making changes if they miss the playoffs. It's not even just 2 years in a row. A lot of times it's just if they have a disappointment, that the bar is set at a certain place and then there's a disappointment. We will often see them make a change. Speaking of coaching, if you haven't answered the FanDuel question of the day, feel free. Oh, you're seeing me. Sorry. Hold on. You're seeing me getting Manny in here. I apologize for that looking weird. Hold on. I will fix that and get Manny Hill in here. We'll continue to answer your questions, comments, and thoughts as we start to try to move forward following the firing of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. Hello, Mr. Hill. Good evening, my friend.
Good evening. How are we doing?
Oh, not too bad. Not too bad. Let me get your sound levels right there. So Manny, we were just talking about how, with Kevin O'Connell and the quarterback situation, it feels like we're going to find out a lot from just what they do at quarterback for how steady he feels within this organization. If they decide to develop McCarthy, if they decide to get some competition, but not necessarily a new starter, I mean, then I think it's a fair assessment to say, well, he must feel like he's in pretty good shape. If they make some sort of all in big type of move with a starting quarterback, I think that says that the pressure is truly on Kevin O'Connell. I tend to think that that's the case, that the pressure is on, but how do you think that O'Connell will now approach this situation where he is judge, jury, and executioner with this roster?
Yeah, I think it's all eyes are on him now. Now that Kwesi has been fired, and you know, uh, presumably KOC is going to be making a lot of the decisions in the draft, free agency. I know that Rob Brzezinski is going to be, leading the football operations now until after the draft is done. But KOC, and I would assume Brian Flores as well, is going to have a heavy voice in the players that they go after in free agency, the players that they draft. What's going to be interesting is if they decide to make some trades, if they decide to trade up or down during the draft, how is that going to be? How is that going to play out? We know Rob Brzezinski's been really good with the cap for a number of years with this franchise, but that whole negotiating trades and getting the best deal possible when you're trying in that position, how much experience does he really have with that? He may have a ton of experience. He's been with the organization for a long time. So that's going to be interesting to see how that kind of plays out as well. But yeah, all eyes are on KOC now. I mean, you can't Quasi's gone, so you can't blame him for draft picks not working out, free agent signings not working out. This is KOC's show now, and all the pressure is on him, and he's going to have to deliver now with everything they do in the offseason and in 2026.
So I want to continue to just answer questions if that's cool with you, Manny. Normally
Yeah.
we come up with some sort of, fun thing or topic or angle, but I think this is just the time to react to what people are saying. But I wanted to ask you first, obviously you and I have been talking about this off the air, but when the news first dropped on Friday that they were firing Kwesi, like, give me your reaction. You don't have to tell me where you were or anything, but just like, what was your, like, the first 5 things that came to your mind or whatever it might be when you saw the news that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah got fired?
When I first saw it, I was like, whoa, oh my God, they actually did it, because I thought, and with the conversations that you and I have had on the air, off the air, I think it was always in the back of our minds that this was a possibility that they would move on from him. But usually that happens right after the regular season is over. They had him do a whole press conference of, talking with you guys after the season. He's down at the Senior Bowl. He's doing all these things that indicate, oh, okay, well, looks like they're going to bring him back for another year. And then this happens at the end of January, and you're like, oh, okay, now what? And that was exactly the first thing that came to my mind after that, was like, okay, they're moving on from him. Now, what are they? Are they going to hire a GM right away? What is the search starting right now? And then you see, okay, well, they're not going to hire anybody until after the draft. So now it's like, all right, KOC, it's on you, man. This is your show now. You've got everything is up to you. I was surprised, but not shocked. I wasn't shocked that they let him go. I was just shocked at the whole timing of it, and more so surprised that Mark Wilf came out and said that we're going to wait till after the draft before we hire somebody to replace Kwesi.
That was also really shocking to me. I kind of found that out in real time because I read the statement while we were doing an emergency podcast. And when I got to that part, I was like, wait, what? So it was not, well, here we're going to change general managers and we're going to hire from outside, and this is the person who's coming in. It was like, no, we just need this guy out of the way so we can go forward with a very important offseason. And there was a word, and I asked Mark Wilf about it. Can't say that I got a very insightful answer, but I had to ask. When he started his press conference, if you go back and watch it, he used the word uncomfortable. Like, we're uncomfortable with the situation. So I had a different question in mind, but I was like, wait a minute, what? So my question to him was, Like, what were you uncomfortable with? And then it was like, all right, we're not getting into that. Like, oh, perhaps I've said too much. But I think what they were uncomfortable with is just the dynamic between the coaching staff and the front office being run by Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. And it was, all right, you're going to have to decide. And the thing that keeps getting overlooked, because everyone wants to debate parental leave, the thing that gets overlooked is that Kevin Seifert reported that Brian Flores, his lack of a contract extension, was connected to the situation with the front office and maybe not being, talk about comfortable, fully comfortable with how much say he had in the defense, who he was working with. And when you talk about a dyed in the wool football guy, I mean, oh my gosh, Flores is like the ultimate football guy. He's been at every level. He's fought his way up from the very bottom, from a player to a scout. Scott Pioli told me a story a couple years ago that when Scott Pioli, former GM of the Chiefs and also executive with the Patriots during the Patriot Way stuff with early Brady. So Pioli told me that the first job Brian Flores had, one of the things he had to do was every single day come into an office where they had this giant magnet board that had every player in the league for every team. They had a little magnet that they would print out and they would put on a thing, and then they had every player. So whenever there was a transaction at all, he had to shift the little magnets around. This guy's now a free agent. This guy, like, this is the ultimate football grinder guy. And to work with someone who is not of that world, I think you could see a natural conflict there. And if the Wilfs were put in a position where they had to say, look, Flores might go somewhere else if you continue down this road with this leadership. I mean, this is like when you get to a coach and quarterback and you go, which guy's easier to replace? Is it easier to move this guy off who, you know, could be look like the fall guy? Or is it easier to just bring back Flores, move him? Or is it easier to like not have Flores? Well, if you don't have Flores, you're in a lot of trouble. So you could see where that would also be involved as well. But I think it was a lot of things. Well, let me get back to the comments here. C-Bake says, the Wilfs seem to really like KOC. Do you think there's a realistic chance they allow KOC to have another stab at a young quarterback with a loaded class next year if they fall short? What do you think of that, Manny?
I think it's possible, but the other part of this is how are the Wilfs going to react if, you know, if they roll into this season? Let's say they go and get like Kyler Murray, somebody that you've talked about a lot. And at that point, you're very likely saying that you're just done with JJ McCarthy and, you know, he's going to be Kyler Murray's backup and you're going to have to go through the 2026 season. You want McCarthy ready, but Kyler Murray is going to be the guy. And you go like 9-8 and you fall short of the playoffs. How are the Wilfs going to handle that? Will they even be willing to give KOC another shot at drafting a young quarterback? I don't know. I mean, historically speaking, the Wilfs don't like missing the playoffs 2 years in a row. They don't like that stuff. And they've never been an ownership group that has wanted the bottom to just fall off of the team and they go all the way into the tank. The one time it kind of happened was in 2011, the first year with Leslie Frazier. They went 3-13. And even then they made the big change of elevating Rick Spielman into a more powerful role in the front office. So they don't typically like for things to kind of fall apart multiple years in a row. So I have a hard time thinking they would want to do it. I kind of think that KOC has kind of earned the opportunity to maybe try it with another quarterback, but I'm not signing his paychecks. That's going to be up to the Wilfs.
Yeah, well, that is another factor too, is that they just gave Brian Flores a lot of money, about $6 million, according to Kevin Seifert, and they certainly gave Kevin O'Connell a big contract and made him one of the higher paid coaches in the NFL after last year. Are they going to be okay with blowing out this coaching staff pay? I don't know that they want to do that. So I think that it's more likely than not that they get an opportunity if the wheels don't come off. Let's say they go 9-8 next year, a winning record. Maybe you make the playoffs, maybe you don't, and then get a shot to take a look at the future. but you are going to buck history at that point. And, I've seen people talk about the Wilfs as like, well, they're calculated and they're seeing 3 moves ahead and they have big, long-term plans and everything. But historically, I just haven't really seen that from them when it comes to not succeeding on the field, regardless of whatever might have happened. Just for example, I remember we were asking Mark Wilf one time about, it was in Florida at the owners meetings 2 years ago, the 7-10 season. And we said something, I don't forget who asked the question. It was like me, Seifert, Andrew Kramer, Dane, Ben, like we're all at a table with him. And someone asked like, well, hey man, I mean, going 7-10, you lost Kirk. So you have to be understanding there. Right. And he was like, no, like we're supposed to be in the playoffs. And look, it's not a criticism to say your owner really badly wants to win, but I also think they get really mad when they don't. And when things go sideways, and I really think that they are proud and do not like to be looking ridiculous. And you can't tell me that this week they don't look ridiculous with Sam Darnold there. So unless they think the only guy responsible for Sam Darnold being a Seattle Seahawk, which I find very freaking hard to believe, is Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, then I think that Kevin O'Connell is under the white hot light as well. I think you have to be. And they could say all day long, yeah, we're going to, take the long-term approach and give him another chance. And when you say he's earned the right, you go, it depends on what date. I mentioned this earlier, Manny, is whatever date you ask someone about KOC, you get a different answer. Because if it was last year in December and you said, hey, would you trust KOC with your life when it comes to quarterback? You'd be like, oh my God, look what's happening. Yes. And then if it was December of this year, you'd be like, let that man nowhere near my quarterback ever. So it's kind of crazy how that happens. John says the most Viking thing ever would be to trade JJ. Then he pans out with another team and we're stuck with Mac Jones. Well, that brings me to something, Manny, of where do you think I laid out on the show three degrees of KOC quarterback opinion. Degree number 1 is that he believes in McCarthy, but just feels like he needs a better backup. Degree number 2 is he wants a true competition, but the person is not really necessarily a locked in starter. And degree number 3 is, okay, someone else is starting. Forget this. I'm not putting my career on JJ McCarthy. Where do you think KOC lands on that scale?
I think he's at 2, probably. It's a really tough position to be in though, because I'm sure he's feeling the pressure, that being KOC, going into 2026. And if you put any sort of stock into JJ McCarthy showing any sort of improvement, it's going to have to be a lot of improvement. Otherwise, you're looking at 8-9, 9-8 again, probably at best. And you're relying on your defense to carry you again, which they kind of did down the stretch of the season in 2025. But there has to be a sense of urgency for this position, for there to be improvement with this position one way or another, rather it's McCarthy showing improvement or you bringing in somebody to maybe push him. It's hard to I almost want to say like 2.5, maybe. Like it's kind of in between I want to bring somebody in to push JJ, but if I can get my hands on somebody that's going to be a bona fide starter, I will actually do that. Like if I could bring in like a Kyler Murray, somebody that can actually start a full season and, can perform well in my offense, I'll do that. But if Kyler Murray's not attainable, if somebody else picks him up, then I'll lean more towards the 2 range where, maybe it's a trade for like a Mac Jones or, a Geno Smith or somebody that can compete with JJ. And if JJ beats him out, that guy would be okay with being the backup.
That's exactly where I was going to go. I was going to go at like 2.6. I think we're away from 1. I think 1 is off the table. I think 2 is not entirely off the table because personally, I think that people change quickly at a young age and they grow quickly at a young age. And think about ourselves. And I know we're not NFL quarterbacks and we weren't under this type of pressure and everything else, but even yourself from, I remember this being early 20s, so much changes when you're 21 to 23, right? From just who you
Mhm.
are and where you are in life and, whatever else. And the same thing can happen with football players where there's been guys, how about even like Dallas Turner? If you evaluated Dallas Turner through his first like 23 games, you would go, I don't know, man. I am just not seeing it. And then all of a sudden, he finds the right spot, but goes along with the right development curve, and it clicks. And then he's making plays, and then his teammates are taking notice. And at the end of the day, the guy's got, whatever it was, 7.5 sacks this year and leads the team in sacks. His pressure rate is among those guys that are in the top 20 out of like 100 for edge rushing. And go like, oh, okay, where did that come from? But that's how young people work sometimes. And McCarthy was coming off of this huge recovery process for a terrible injury. You would rather tear your ACL 10 times in a row than have that meniscus thing. That meniscus thing's a nightmare. That full recovery where you can't do anything for many months and then you finally, I don't really mean that about 10 ACLs, but like the ACL is just so much simpler most of the time unless you tear multiple things. Then he had another procedure mixed in and then all the pressure and then an injury right away. Like all those things are, I mean, what a roller coaster. So it's, the door is not closed there, but you probably are 2.5. Like you're probably away from, all right, we can just bring in someone to kind of regularly compete with him. I think you need someone that you could be totally comfortable winning 10 to 12 games as your starting quarterback, or that person can't be here. If it's somebody that you think, well, JJ got hurt, maybe this was always my standard, Manny, was, well, if Kirk got hurt, can the backup go 500?
Mhm.
Sean Mannion, OC of the Philadelphia Eagles now, could not go 500.
Nope.
Trevor Siemian, maybe, but probably not. Maybe, but not when they had bad defenses. He did it that one time with Denver with a good defense, but just generally probably not. When they had, Case Keenum, he proved that he could be better than that, but that's kind of like your 500 type backup. I thought Carson Wentz was that way. And if Wentz played one more game and hadn't had the injury and everything, maybe he wins and maybe he's a 500 backup. I think it's got to be better than that. You have to trust the person to win more. Steve says KOC's seat might be a bit warm, so yes, he'll likely be short-sighted to save his butt. That means 2026 and 2027 draft capital on the table. And Toucans says, I'd rather go 0-17 than sacrifice future capital for Murray, Tua, or Jones. Well, I don't think you're going to have to do it for Kyler. I believe he's going to be released. There is a date in March that he is owed like $20 million that there's just no way. Like they're going to very likely release him before that or redo something to be able to move on from him. I just can't see him getting that money from Arizona. And I also can't see anyone trading for his salary. So that's going to be a release situation. But to the point, Manny, I mean, if O'Connell's feeling it, like, what do you think about trading draft picks? What do you think about spending as much money as you can to get like Breece Hall or something and just kick that cap hit down the road? The guy who is now running things is the master of kick that money down the road.
Yeah.
It feels like that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, it because it just feels like desperation mode for everybody. And maybe not necessarily Rob Brzezinski, but certainly for KOC. I mean, he's feeling all the pressure now because this is his job that's really on the line if they don't deliver. And the other part is, I'm thinking back at the idea of him getting another shot at, a young quarterback. Okay, so we're thinking, all right, 2026 happens the way it happens, and you're looking at drafting a quarterback in 2027. So that's like Julian Sayin, maybe, or something like that. I mean, Julian Sayin is probably going to be one of the top quarterbacks available. The best way to get those guys is to tank, and this team is too good to tank, So it's like if you go 8-9, 9-8, that's going to put you at what, pick 14 or pick 15, like, and then what are you doing? You're spending draft capital to try and move up and take somebody like Julian saying. So that's going to be very tricky. And if you've now gone into 2026 and you've spent a lot of draft capital to trade for somebody like a Breece Hall, or another, you trade for a Mac Jones, you use a 3rd round pick to get Mac Jones or something like that. You're using draft capital. How are you going to have enough draft capital to be able to do that sort of reset if you need to go get the young quarterback in 2027 to try and start over? It's going to be really tricky, man. This situation is dicey. So I think if you're KOC, you got to be thinking, I'm just going to swing for the fences in 2026 and try to get the best possible quarterback situation I can get, and bleep them picks and go all in for 2026. And if we go 12-5 and make the NFC Championship game, I'll keep my job, and then whatever happens after that happens.
I think the frustration here for a lot of fans is that all of this just sounds so familiar.
Yep.
And for me, the one guy, and this is just having talked to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and listened to him for 4 years, I think that he fully understood analytic concepts, that he understood them extremely well. He had done all the research, done all the analysis, but your job as a GM is to convince the front office of your ideas. And also, all analytic ideas are not better than all other ideas, because, really it would have pointed more to move on from Sam Darnold than pay him, except for the issue was JJ McCarthy wasn't ready. The issue isn't even so much that Sam Darnold went to the Super Bowl. If JJ McCarthy had been ready and good, then we wouldn't have this discussion, and it wouldn't even be a conversation. We'd be like, well, great for Sam, but all's well that ends well. Stephon Diggs had a ton of success in Buffalo. We never even talked about it, because it's like, well, he got Justin Jefferson, so who cares? But it looks so much worse because McCarthy was this poor. But if McCarthy doesn't find a way to turn it around, then you're talking about getting other people's quarterbacks, messing with the cap, trading draft picks, win now, filling needs with picks. And all of it just sounds so darn familiar. And the one guy who might have had some vision analytically to get you out of it, like, going to the bottom is what I mean, never could get there with the organization, and never really had a chance because they were winning a lot of games, and was able to tear it apart once and then get them back to 14 wins. I mean, when you think about that, like, that guy was at the helm when they tore the roster completely down with his leadership, when I think he still had a lot of say, and then built it back up to the point they won 14 games. And now he's the biggest fool in the entire world, right? Like, that seems odd to me. But the guy who was at the helm for when you actually did what you'll probably need to do in the near future is now gone. So I'm not really sure exactly how you competitive rebuild again, other than just maybe landing the right quarterback if it's not JJ McCarthy. So Doomer KO says, can we trade for Sam Bradford? Steven mentions Anthony Richardson. That you better bring an umbrella to training camp, because football is going to be raining everywhere, all over the sidelines if you're with Anthony Richardson.
That would be some quarterback competition.
Yes, it
man. Would. Goodness gracious.
Oh, man. Cause and Effect says, can we all agree that as a whole they dropped the ball? There's a chance to get it right. Yes. Yeah, I think that is the right approach to Manny is, well, one person got the axe. You will never convince me that one person was responsible for letting Sam Darnold go and turning it over to JJ McCarthy. And there's one guy who was supposed to know. There's one guy who was supposed to be the person with the best eye for quarterbacks. But what it proves, Manny, is not that KOC is stupid. It proves that it's impossible. Like, there are so many examples I could give you. I mean, how about like the Denver Broncos came to mind and them getting Russell Wilson? Like, who didn't like that move? What? Everyone was like, oh, wow. Okay. Like, Russell Wilson to the Broncos, they're serious now and they're going to win now. And then it turned out that Bridgewater was a better Bronco quarterback than Russ. And then there was a rumor that or I think this was actually reported by somebody, maybe like Seth Wickersham, someone who does the dig into the dirt stuff kind of thing, that the Philadelphia Eagles tried to trade for Russ and move on from Jalen Hurts after his first year because they thought he was too flawed. Like, what? The Eagles are the cream of the crop. San Francisco, they draft Trey Lance. They end up with a 7th freaking rounder. They would have drafted Purdy 1 overall if they knew he was going to be this good. So that's what it really, really proves, is that nobody truly knows what's going to happen next with quarterbacks. And I guess that it takes us to a spot, Manny, where it's like, we don't really know what's going to happen next here. And it's a helpless feeling, I think, for Vikings fans to be in a spot where you don't know who's playing at quarterback, whether it's McCarthy or whoever. Is it McCarthy taking the next step? And you've been living in that world for so long. How many seasons? Let's add them up, Manny. I've been here for 10, so everything through my Viking lens starts in 2016. How many seasons did they go into the next year where we weren't fully sure who the quarterback was going to be? And remember, Kirk signed a lot of extensions along the way. I'm going to say probably out of 10, like 7, where there was a reasonable chance it would be a different quarterback. Because you think about Kirk, he was going to be there for 18 and 19 for sure. It wasn't a sure thing he was going to be there 20 because they needed to sign him to an extension.
Yeah.
It wasn't a sure thing he was going to be there 2022 because it was a new regime. 2023, he did not sign an extension with them, or they didn't sign him to an extension, so we weren't sure. I mean...
Well, 2020, what year was it where we were saying like they maybe should have traded Kirk and tanked? Was that...
Well,
was that...
It's a sore subject. I know exactly what year it was.
It's a couple seasons, it felt like.
It was 2020. Because they got rid of they got rid of all those guys after 19. And then that 2020 draft had like 5 good quarterbacks.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause they started out 1-5.
Yep.
And then Dalvin Cook went crazy at Lambeau, ran for like 150 yards. And then they thought that they could turn the season around. And yeah.
Yep.
Oof.
That was the year. And that year, since we just live in a simulation, will be 2027. I think that year is 2027. This one is 2019, where you got to win a playoff game. Like, the pressure's on. You've just disappointed massively in the previous year because of a quarterback decision. Oh my gosh.
And we get rumors of KOC being traded somewhere.
That kind of happened in 2024. Although I think those rumors were created by someone who knows him. But anyway, I mean, there's that Matthew McConaughey meme where he's like looking at the can, like it's a flat circle, right? And that's what it feels like right now. Palm Tree Yeti says, can the Vikings take a big swing before hiring a GM? Like, would it make the job less desirable if they leave bare cabinets? I think that's a really good question, Manny.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's this hiring the GM after the draft thing is just, I can't get that out of my head, because how do you even evaluate what the Vikings do in the 2026 draft properly if they're not going to hire the number one decision maker until after they make all of these decisions in this draft? And this is kind of an important draft. This is, they've had some, I don't think Kwesi was as bad a drafter as everybody is saying. He's had some good players, but the end result of over the course of 4 years has been short of what it should be. And so they need this draft they need to get some players out of this draft. They need a couple of guys who are going to be significant impact players if they're going to stay in pretty good shape for the next few years. And when you don't really have a number one GM guy that's making those decisions, and you're going to bring him in after your KOC and your Brian Flores, and you've made all these decisions on these picks. And then what happens if the next guy you hire brings in, you bring that guy in, and he's like, well, you guys took this guy in the first round, but I had like a second round grade on him. Why did you take him? This doesn't make any sense. Like, now you're just kind of starting off possibly with not a great start with a new regime. That could really complicate things.
You're absolutely right. And not only that, but I think the point of the question is, okay, you go into the draft and, oh, we've traded up and moved next year's first. They wouldn't do that because they might have to draft a quarterback, but we've traded up and we've traded 2 seconds from 2027 to move up to draft Jeremiah Love, a running back, to save our butts tomorrow. If you're the new GM, you're going to like, you did what? Like, why did you did what? So that makes you wonder, do they already have it in mind? I mean, the obvious person is George Payton. Do they already have in mind who it's going to be? Could it just be Rob Brzezinski? Does he want that job? Is that something that they feel comfortable with, making this the new triangle of authority, which would be Flores, Kevin O'Connell and Rob Brzezinski? Do they want it to be that way? It makes much more sense to name the GM after the draft if it's Rob Brzezinski than it does to not do a search. At the same time, even if a GM showed up now, tomorrow, and said, all right, I'm in charge now, you're going to tell all the scouts what they're going to look for. Like what they do with scouts. Scouts don't just walk out and be like, fast, tall. Like that's not how it works. They have what they're looking for. They are trying to identify Vikings. They are trying to look for what works for the coaches, which again is why when you pin drafting on one person, it's probably not fair, right? So when you go and you look at, just for example, like a Jay Ward is such a Flores player. He is physical. He's got toughness. He's got versatility. Ty Ingram Dawkins. That is a player that just screams Brian Flores. So the scouts are looking for those types of players. If you come in as a new GM and you're like, okay, whatever you guys were looking for, can you like look for something different? You'd pretty much just have to run the draft the same way anyway. Where it's really interesting is free agency, because a new GM is not coming in here and laying out a new free agency plan, which everyone would be on the same page. These are pros. They know what they've done. They've got the data. They've got the film. So you're saying like KOC run the free agency. Whoever picks up the next cap bill is in a lot of trouble if they just move every single dollar, which, hey, that's what Zim and Rick did. And that is why Kwesi in 2022 tried to draft for the moon, because he knew the cap situation was in a lot of trouble and he tried to get as many players as he could. It just went bust on him. But every one of these things is connected to another thing that is tied to a timeline. And if you continue to do the same exact stuff, you'll continue to get the same exact results. Of course, if this is the point where we always have to stop and go, if McCarthy was good, this would be so great for them. And it would be so great for them. Manny, my FanDuel question of the day was Mike Vrabel is the favorite to win Coach of the Year at minus 750. Mike McDonald right behind him at plus 550. Shanahan, Johnson, and Cohen are the other guys mentioned on FanDuel, but at long shot odds, who do you think is the most deserving head coach for Coach of the Year this year? Who do you think, Manny?
I think it's Mike Vrabel. I think just turning, and I would probably go Liam Cohen a close second. I think just the turnaround that both of those guys were able to construct, I think, is really impressive. Now, people could say the Patriots had an easy schedule. I saw the graphic. I don't know if you saw this, where somebody laid out the Patriots schedule and like everybody except for like the Jets and the AFC South was a coach that got fired, which is pretty funny. The Patriots had a pretty easy schedule, but look, man, they got to the playoffs and their defense played really well, and now they're in the Super Bowl. So you can't knock it. You can't knock how they've gotten here because they're here. And Mike Vrabel has been a major, major part of that. Just, I think, instilling a different kind of attitude than what they had with Gerard Mayo a year ago. And, much more credibility because he's a guy that's been a successful head coach before. I think he's just done a great job. So I would go Vrabel and Liam Cohen with what he did in Jacksonville this year too was really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, the Jacksonville jump is really crazy. I mean, when they were so far down and Trevor Lawrence was looking like he might be on his way out of Jacksonville, and then they win 13 games. I think that was the most impressive overall job, but with Vrabel doing it on that stage with that quarterback, Drake May and his ascent is really so connected to Vrabel but also they took advantage of, you know what, the rookie quarterback contract. They spent a ton of money. So it wasn't like Gerard Mayo and Mike Vrabel had the exact same situation. It was actually closer to Jacksonville having a similar situation to what it was the year before, and Doug Peterson having it totally fall apart and Cohen doing a lot better job. But, I think both of them are equally deserving. And I mean, Kyle Shanahan had to play half the year with a backup quarterback and won 5 out of 8 games and got into the playoffs while losing Bosa and Fred Warner and Brandon Ayuk. I mean, I thought just pure coaching job, that was probably the best overall to even have a chance. They had a chance at the conference. So I think Shanahan deserves better odds, but it'll probably go to Vrabel. I shot you 99 says, what's a realistic timetable for the Vikings to make the Super Bowl? A decade or longer? That is where we yearn for draft sims. We'll get there. We'll get to the draft sims. We will. You know when the draft is? It's a long time from now. We'll get there. We'll have draft sims. The Super Bowl is a hard one, Manny, because
depends on the quarterback, man.
Well, here's the thing. So last year when I did my preseason predictions, which I went over some of them earlier in the year when I got bored when they were 4-8, but I'll have to look back again at just how many were right and wrong. See, out of 50, how many I got at least relatively right. For Seattle, one of my predictions was that Sam Darnold would throw for 4,500 yards and Seattle would win 9 games. So, close on one and not as close on another. But I thought the Seattle Seahawks with Sam Darnold were a pretty good team and would probably compete for a playoff spot, and that would be about it. And then all of a sudden they win 14 games. The last year before that, I thought that the Vikings, I think you thought this as well, with Sam Darnold would compete for a playoff spot. And they won 14 games. Now, who's the next Sam Darnold to do this, right? I mean, if you go through every quarterback in the league and go, hey, was that person ever cooked at one point? Was that person ever talked about as being down and out at one point? How about Jared Goff? Gets traded to the Detroit Lions. And I know it's a little different because they were tanking and everything. And then they had that crazy draft. But, like Jared Goff was left for dead at one point as someone nobody wanted. And yes, I am hinting at Kyler Murray here, but there's been a lot of quarterbacks through the years in the National Football League, the Rich Gannons and so forth, who have gone through some form of a Sam Darnold arc, which makes me not want to say that any quarterback that they bring in, that there's no chance it ends up working out. Now, do they usually go to the Super Bowl like Sam Darnold? Not always. That's why we still bring up Rich Gannon or Brad Johnson or whatever, because most of the time it's Roethlisberger, Brady, Mahomes, those guys are going. But you just never know. As far as like when do they look like they'll be the darling, the belle of the ball, the team that hit everything right, doesn't look like right away. It looks like that's going to be a really tough task. The only way to get there, Manny, would be if this defense is number one. And there might be a case for put as much as you can into this defense because it's not that likely you're going to have an elite offense. And we saw teams get close. The Texans, man, if CJ Stroud hadn't just completely fallen apart, they could have won that game. The Denver Broncos, if they didn't have to play Jared Stidham, they could have won that game. Like defense this year was kind of king in a lot of ways, as we stand here with 2 great quarterbacks who were drafted 3rd overall. But it was in a lot of ways outside of just the Super Bowl. And even then Seattle with their great defense, that was king across the NFL. And you have the best DC in the league. You have a great front 7. You've got at least 2 starting corners, probably 1 starting safety in Josh Metellus. I mean, it's not insane to think that if you got average quarterback play that you're at least in the discussion. Super Bowl is always hard because they haven't been since 77. And I was watching the Super Bowl recaps and I felt so sad about all the fumbles and all the interceptions and block punts and everything, but they haven't been since then. So you can't ever predict Super Bowl for this franchise, but at least like, could you be back in it next year? Sure you could with Flores coming back.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, and it might have to be a deal like you said, where it's just it's a 2017 type of Vikings defense where they're just like number one across the board, and you get, decent quarterback play like they got in 2017 from Case Keenum, and that ends up being enough. And you just give yourself a chance to get into the dance, and maybe some things go your way and you end up in the Super Bowl. Didn't really work that way in 2017. I mean, it bounced their way, fortunately to get them to the NFC Championship game. But at that point, they had basically ran out of gas, and they got drilled by Philadelphia. But I think the best case scenario for this Vikings team in 2026 is that the defense just goes up to another level, because it's another year for Van Ginkel and Grenard and Cashman and the corners and Jalen Redmond and all these guys, with another year in Brian Flores' scheme and another year better, and that they just take it up another notch from what they did in 2025, which was really, really good. If they can kick it up another notch, and then whether it's McCarthy or Kyler Murray or Mac Jones or whoever, they just get decent quarterback play, they'll be in the playoffs, and then maybe you just get in and you hope some things go your way, and maybe you can go on a run.
Adrian says, feel like Mac Jones trade is more likely going to happen now that KOC has full control of the roster. His job is on the line. Who do you think is more likely to run the offense better, Jones or JJ? Well, Jones has led a team to the playoffs and won games with San Francisco. And really, so I was looking back at something, because we always think of KOC as throwing downfield. It wasn't actually totally true when Kirk was the quarterback. And a lot of that is Kirk. But I mean, when you talk about like taking what's there for you with TJ Hawkinson, that was something Kirk was very good at. When you look at how they performed 2022 and 2023 Kirk versus Mac Jones when he made the playoffs, Mac Jones this year, it is not that different. And I know I always kind of push back a little on that comparison with Kirk and Mac, because like if you're comparing a guy who was a 4th round draft pick once upon a time to a 1st round pick, like clearly there's a bit of a talent gap there. But Mac Jones is kind of a Kirk clone. And we always thought about this, if you had Kirk at $2 million, $4 million, what could you do? Like, what would it be different? So I've never completely, hated that idea of Mac Jones. Plus, if, you've got JJ McCarthy taking that big step, then yeah, I mean, you should be able to beat out Mac Jones, and Mac Jones could be your backup. The question I have is, if you're San Francisco, you're like, oh, no. I'm not helping you. Not unless you make me help you. Now, they helped by giving up Jordan Mason, but not unless you are really, really helping me. And are you going to give up a second? No way. You can't give up a second. A third? Okay. I mean, I guess you could see that. How much are you really going to give up to the San Francisco 49ers if you are the Vikings to get Mac Jones? Do you have to include Jordan Addison as part of this trade and then sign Jalen Naylor? And that, you know what I mean? Like, this gets very complicated. But if you're talking about trying to save yourself, then you're going to do whatever it takes and try to make up the difference somewhere else. Doomer KO says, is this going to be a Bill O'Brien situation? One of my favorite Vikings games is the loser gets fired matchup between O'Brien and Zimmer. And it was very close to a catch at the end by DeAndre Hopkins, I think, in the end zone, that would have given the Texans the win in that game, or maybe at least the tie. I'm ready for this to get spicy. It does feel like, as of right now, one man having too much power or two men having too much power and having it not be overseen, which could open the floodgates, Manny, for just about anything that's coming our way.
You remember, think back to where Bill O'Brien was in the 2019 playoffs with the Houston Texans. They're in the divisional round and they're playing at Arrowhead, and I think they were up like 24-7 or something like that. They were up big in that game, and you're thinking Bill O'Brien and the Houston Texans are about to go to the AFC Championship, right? Ready to beat Mahomes and win in Arrowhead. Like, what? And then everything fell apart. The rest is history. The Chiefs go on, win the Super Bowl that year, and Bill O'Brien, I think, got fired after the next season.
2020, yeah.
Yeah, 2020.
In the next season, yep.
Yeah, everything fell apart just that quickly. And yeah, I can't help but to wonder, like, all right, KOC, you're the show now, and it's a little bit of a different thing because you're coming off a 9-8, um, disappointing season, but you give KOC all the power going into 2026, and he makes these moves in desperation, and this things in this league can go left very, very quickly, and it's just going to be really fascinating to see the amount of desperation that they show and the moves that they make to try and set themselves up to win heavy.
Dan says, what a difference that 4 months makes. Remember how giddy KOC was after joint practices with JJ. Hey, it was
Yeah.
one heck of a joint practice. And I have vowed that I will never overreact to a joint practice ever again. I apologize. I'm sorry. I thought the Patriots looked pretty average. It's actually funny because after week 2, I texted Chad Graff, who covers the Patriots, used to cover the Vikings. And I was like, is it going to be like a Darnold Jets situation with Drake May, where the guy has like a ton of talent, but they can never figure out the team around him, and eventually they just get. I texted him that because it looked like that after like 2 weeks and that joint practice. I thought this team stinks, and yet
And then they lose to the Raiders week 1.
that's what I mean, right? Like they lost to the Raiders, and then they were unimpressive in the next couple of weeks. And I was just like, oh man, they're just like the Jets. This team is so lost, and May is going to be awesome 5 years from now. Well, it turns out Mike Vrabel knows what he's doing, and they did have a favorable schedule. And that probably was the factor that was the biggest is, I mean, you need that. You need, and that's why they shouldn't have to apologize to anybody, but you need the right path to get there. You can't just have the hardest schedule, the most injuries. Like the margins are so thin that the retelling of the Vikings 2025 NFL season would be that if several people who got hurt didn't get hurt, we feel differently. Kwesi has his job. And one of those people is Christian Darrisaw. You mentioned Harrison Smith, Andrew Van Ginkel, Blake Cashman. These are huge pieces that got hurt that they may have been able to squeeze out one more win against Pittsburgh or something early in the season. And had JJ McCarthy not gotten hurt after week 2, he plays the Bengals the next week. So you get probably a pretty easy win the same way. And then he goes overseas, leads the team, 2 winnable games. Maybe you're talking about confidence. Maybe you're talking about KOC figuring out early the adjustments he had to make as opposed to at the end of the season, because he gets criticized for that. And there's definitely truth to the criticisms, but also when was it that you were supposed to make these adjustments when the guy misses 5 weeks and doesn't play? So it's crazy how things work out that way in the NFL, where, you judge the results, but if you start to pick it apart, even with those draft picks or anything else, you go, yeah, man, that was just kind of some bad breaks there. I mean, even the Atlanta game to not have Darrisaw, and of course the guy over the left tackle is the one causing all of the havoc. And he never gets a chance to really get in a rhythm and continue to play. So one more thing I wanted to ask you, Manny, and I do. Doomer KO says Matthew was a Bears doubter this year. Does that disqualify him for the GM job? No, I don't think so. I thought that the Bears were not going to get this much progress out of Caleb Williams in 1 year. I also thought that their team was just pretty mediocre in terms of a roster. I still kind of think that. And they got a bunch of insane, crazy wins at the end. But yeah, I mean, they definitely won a lot more than I thought they were going to win after week 1. That's why they play the games, Manny. Here's what I want to know from you as we go into the final, few minutes of the show, and appreciate everybody's participation in the comment section, is how will you think of the time that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was the general manager? Like when because, you tend to like a little bit of Vikings history, Manny, and tend to occasionally think about the Vikings and things that have happened to them. When we talk 5 years from now about when Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was the GM, like how will you think of it?
I can't get around thinking about how they had Sam Darnold and they let him go. That's just going to be it's fair or not to Kwesi, whether he was the primary decision maker behind that or not, or if it was a collective decision to let Sam Darnold walk, that is going to be the thing that comes to mind right away is that they had Sam Darnold. He threw for 4,300 yards. They went 14-3. They let him walk, and he goes to the Seattle Seahawks, and they go to the Super Bowl. Like that's going to be because when you think about everything else that they've done, even with some of the missed draft picks and everything, they put together such a good roster. This is such a good football team overall from a talent perspective. But I don't know how you get around thinking about that decision that they made with the quarterback position, because you bring Sam Darnold back, even just on a franchise tag in 2025. Who knows? Certainly the Seattle Seahawks don't go to the Super Bowl. And maybe you're in a position to where you end up going to the Super Bowl or going on a run to the NFC Championship game. And then everybody is looking at this situation completely different. So it's going to be hard to really get around not thinking about that when I think back at Kwesi's tenure.
I think, of course, yes, that's going to define what happened here. I will think of it as they finally came to the right idea, which was to build around the rookie quarterback contract. And when they got to the fork in the road, it was like the football gods tossed, I don't know, something on fire into that fork in the road. Like, oh, okay, well, we're here. We've arrived at the rookie quarterback contract. And then they said, catch this flaming thing. And that flaming thing was Sam Darnold. They went, what do we do? And they panicked. And they saw him lose those games. This is a terrible metaphor, but you kind of understand what I'm saying, right? It's like you've laid out your path and you get to this point where you have this decision to make and you get this craziness thrown into it of the last two games and of Sam playing this well and everything else. And to that point, they had executed exactly what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah had promised, which was the competitive rebuild. And they did it. And trust me, I was very skeptical of the competitive rebuild. I did not think it was the best way to get to an elite roster. I did not think it was the best way to get to the top. I've got a huge piece coming out on the draft tomorrow at purpleinsider.football, but let me spoil a little bit for you. You don't hit on many picks if you don't have them. I don't love that as an analytics enjoyer of not having many, darts to throw at the dartboard in a random event that is the NFL draft. So they did a lot of things that were not at all what I expected from the analytics GM. And then they arrived at that fork in the road and they had this wild end to that 2024 season. And to me, they panicked based on what they saw and went the wrong way. And I remember you and I talking about, hey, I can show you all these quarterbacks who had bad first playoff games. Flacco, Super Bowl champ. Stafford, Super Bowl champ. Manning, Eli, and Peyton, Super Bowl champ. I mean, Justin Herbert does this every year, and people are like, what we need is more Justin Herbert. And yet, when it happens to Sam Darnold, they end up going that way. And I think staying with the plan that was the right plan was also the problem. So not being malleable, not saying, what, McCarthy hasn't played, we need to franchise tag. I know that's going to leave us short at position X, Y, and Z. Go use your data to find Eric Wilson and Isaiah Rodgers at guard, at running back, at whatever, as opposed to paying a ton of money for Aaron Jones, a ton of money for, all the free agents that they signed, restructure a contract, do what you need to do, and give yourself this option. And if Sam Darnold, and I know on franchise tags really tough to trade, but if Sam Darnold had been not good in training camp and McCarthy looked like amazing or something, you could always move him. So that was to me the more flexible thing, but they stayed the path. And this is what, there's many things that went into Adofo-Mensah's firing, but the main one, of course, is that the quarterback situation didn't work out. And that was his plan. And that was what he wanted them to do, was we're not going to win the Super Bowl with Sam Darnold. We're probably not good enough around him, and he's not good enough to elevate us and get us there. That was the thinking at the time. So we need to build the rest of the roster with this money and go to JJ McCarthy. And so I think that there's a lot of things that are kind of right ideas that never got there. Drafting 2024, great idea. Not getting to the bottom after you lost Kirk or even bringing back Kirk. That's one we don't bring up. You let go Dalvin Cook, Delvin Tomlinson, Eric Kendricks, Adam Thielen, whoever else, Zadarius Smith, like a bunch of guys you let go out the door, but you kept Kirk so you could just sort of hang around. And then shocker, you draft 10th. Well, that doesn't really get you there, right? So it was like a lot of good things idea-wise that never quite got there. And then they didn't make the big pivot when they needed to. That's how I will remember it. I don't think that him being fired is like being victimized. Like the results are what they are. And Darnold's in the Super Bowl and people inside the building aren't believing in you. And you had to keep Flores, and now it's all on everybody to try to save themselves. So I guess, Manny, that's how I'm going to think of it. And also some of the absolutely insane things, luck-wise. McCarthy getting hurt. There's no other quarterback that's ever had that happen that's missed their whole first season. Not to mention Lewis Cine, who I don't believe was ever going to become a great player. But the guy breaks his leg in his fifth game, and that's not a small little like ankle tweak. That's like bone through the skin type of stuff. Catastrophic injuries. Like, man, who would have seen that one coming? And then they win against Seattle in Seattle last year, which meant that they were playing for the number 1 seed. Had they lost that game, they would not have been, and they would have rested their starters and then played Tampa Bay in the playoffs in 2024, which would have been way better than going out to Glendale and playing after a game against the Lions against a really, really good Rams team that was better than their record. So I guess I'll think about all the things that could have happened, which makes it a Minnesota Vikings subject, Manny.
Yeah, story of the franchise, man, where you just think about like if you just would have done this one thing differently. You know, you always go back to I think it was 2011 when they won that game late in the year, or no, it was they had a win over Carolina against the Panthers that got them to 3-13, or they finished 3-13 that year. And if they had lost that game, they would have been 2-14. They would have had the number 1 pick, and they would have been able to get Andrew Luck. And at that point, you know, I mean, Christian Ponder was a rookie and everything in 2011, but you know, if you get the number 1 overall pick and it's generational talent at quarterback, you take that guy. You just do. Yeah, man, it's one game, one play, one injury, one decision. It can change the landscape of an entire franchise's fortunes. And the Vikings, unfortunately, historically, have been more often than not on the wrong side of those situations.
Manny, on Thursday night, we'll have you and Brian Murphy for some Super Bowl trivia. We had a great time with that last year. We're going to try to give Murph odds this time, I guess, because he got run out of the building last time. So we'll have some fun on Thursday night and do that, and maybe lighten the mood a little bit around here, and a lot else to come as well. I'm going to hang around and answer a few more questions from Vikings fans. I got pretty behind in the chat, so I'm going to kind of rapid fire through those, but I appreciate your time, kind sir, and I will see you on Thursday night.
Sounds good. See everybody later. Football.
All right, football. Manny Hill, appreciate his time there. All right, let me get back into the comment section here. Let's see. Kit. We'll just call you Kit. It's a long name. At what point is this on the Wilfs for being so hands-off with a second consecutive coach and GM pair that their relationship melted down within 10 months of a playoff appearance? I think that's a very fair criticism. I know Judd wrote about that, and I can't disagree that when you are, you know, you're not in the building every single day. That was something that I think it was Chad Graff texted me about, like Robert Kraft being in the building every single day. Like, you have your finger on the pulse, and I don't necessarily think they need to move here, but when you're counting on someone in the building to be your liaison and you're trying to guess at what it's like in the everyday culture, that can be a lot more difficult than if you're there every single day. And that's why I've kind of thought that they need a general manager who's really connected at the hip with ownership. That from the outside, that's why I like the George Payton idea. connected with the hip with ownership where their word is what's going on. And it's not a GM and head coach together. It is the general manager is their guy and the coach answers to the GM and the GM answers to ownership. That might be the chain of command that's necessary to not have this happen again. Cause you're right. It is quite a coincidence. Isn't it? It is quite a coincidence. Someone asked about Malik Willis and Steve says there's no chance about Malik Willis. Oh, Steve, no chance is not allowed on the show. No chance is not allowed on the show because we're talking about the Minnesota Vikings. So anything is possible is the mantra of this show. Here's the sales pitch to Malik Willis if you're Kevin O'Connell, because I kind of like it. Your sales pitch to Malik Willis would be this. Look, the last guy who showed up here with a few years of development, with a big arm and was a very good athlete, left here for $100+ million contract. The guy before him improved his leadership and performed at a high enough level that he got $100 million contract. So what if you drop on by for a 2-year deal or something, a 1-year contract with us? Hey, even Daniel Jones, right? Like a 1-year type of contract for you to be a real starter. Because you could take, if you're Malik Willis, you could take a 3-year, $75 million deal that's basically a 1-year contract. Or you could take a 1-year contract as a starter with Justin Jefferson and presumably Jordan Addison and a passing game that uses your arm strength and then earn yourself a ton of money into the future. It's not crazy. It's not a crazy pitch. But I mean, if you're Malik Willis, you're saying, all right, but what about 9? Like, do I have to compete with 9? Because if I do, I could go somewhere else. However, if you go to Miami, if you go to Arizona, I mean, if you have a bad year starting for those terrible franchises, what happens to your career? Do you get another shot? Sam had to be a backup again. He was with terrible franchises. That's a good sales pitch. You have to admit that's a good sales pitch. Hey, if you're the real deal, you're going to win the job. Plus, we're done with 9. Just throwing it out there, right? I mean, I don't think it's a bad sales pitch at all. I really don't. Pie chart between all the different quarterbacks. Oh yeah, that's, I mean, that's like all of them have like 20%, 10%, Gino, Kyler, Malik. I think Malik probably has less. I still think I like what I did there. I mean, I think if Malik was in the room right now, he'd be like, you know what? You're right. Throw it to Justin Jefferson instead of what? Trey McBride, a tight end, is going to get you 9 yards per attempt, or Miami. I mean, Jalen Waddle, but he has trouble staying healthy. They have a new coaching staff. Do they know what they're doing? I mean, Kevin O'Connell's offense with a strong-armed quarterback once upon a time did pretty well. And then you add a little bit of, velocity to the run game there. I don't know. Maybe. K-Skull, has anyone heard from O'Connell on this? That's going to have to wait until the combine, I assume. I assume that it will be the first time that we'll have a chance. Old Purple Insider is expected to be there in Indianapolis with Chris Trapasso, the Purple Insider draft expert, formerly of CBS Sports. We'll see what we get there. If that's the first, there could be a possibility of another time where O'Connell talks before that, but normally that's the first time that the head coach and GM. Now, I guess, I don't know if Rob Brzezinski's going to talk there or not. Jim says Rob Brzezinski is just there to manage the salary cap, or is his job to be subservient to the general manager? Well, as far as like how that power dynamic worked with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, that I don't know. I think they were supposed to work together, and the salary cap, but also negotiating contracts with players and stuff like that. Details. I mean, he knows every detail inside and out. Very, very, very smart guy. So I think that it was supposed to be like working on this thing together, but there's just a lot of respect for Rob inside the building, which is probably why they're trusting him to be able to lead this thing. Dan says this whole thing reflects poorly on the Wilfs, especially because they extended him last summer. It does and it doesn't. Like, in a way, of course it does, because you did it at a weird time. And it looks like you did it because Darnold went to the Super Bowl. Even if that's not true, it certainly looks that way. And it looks reactionary. It looks like, hey, did you have any idea what was going on inside of your building? So for that, yes. When you compare it to the rest of the league and the decisions that were made this offseason, it's pretty well on par. I mean, it's on par. There's a lot of reactionary decisions around the league, and it's kind of how the league works right now. It's actually how all leagues work right now. I mean, what were the Milwaukee Bucks before they fired their coach and hired Doc Rivers? Weren't they like 30-13 or something? And then they hired Doc Rivers. I mean, you see this all over the place. Hockey coaches get fired after a half of season of a bad start just after they were hired. They get fired. Budenholzer, he wins. Isn't that his name? I'm not an NBA reporter. For the Bucks, wins the championship. He's fired. You got Malone in Denver. He wins a championship. He's fired. I mean, what? Like, this is how it's working these days. And that's why I don't think that it's really that smart to be hiring and firing people all the time. The Magic Man, y'all ready for Kirk O'Chains? I wouldn't count it out. I would not count it out, because that's somebody who KOC could trust to run every part of his offense. And then we do know this, that if you build a good enough running game like they had in 19 with Kirk, and all he's got to do is kind of run the boots and stuff, I mean, you can make the playoffs. I'm not saying it's a good idea, but it can happen. Kerpluppy says another year like this occurs in 26 and B-Flow is the coach in 27. I'm not counting that out either, considering what Buffalo just did. And normally what happens is you go from an enthusiastic coach to a hard-nosed coach, right? You go from the two polar opposites. I mean, the first person that brought this up when B-Flow came back, I was like, I don't know, you never see this. And then Joe Brady gets hired. And I'm like, okay, I take it back. Sometimes you do see this, where the coordinator gets bumped up to the head coach position. And if the defense was top 5 and they missed the playoffs, then it might happen. That is not insane. Steven says, how are Kirk's stats in 2025? They weren't great. They won't get better. They were okay. I think PFF had him as 14th. They threw a lot behind the line of scrimmage, a lot of yards after catch. If you had the 14th best quarterback play, you're definitely in the playoffs as the Vikings last year. That's how they might think, even though past results do not always predict future outcomes. BC73, bring in Malik Willis to compete with McCarthy. If you bring in Malik Willis, I think you have to convince Malik Willis that he's the starter. Because if you're Willis and you look around the NFL, and let's say you have 5 offers, you got the Jets, you got the Dolphins, you got the Cardinals. But if you come to Minnesota and say, hey, are you interested in my services? And you tell them, well, how do you feel about, we'll give you a contract, but how do you feel about a quarterback competition starting right now? I mean, if you're Willis, you've been working for years to get your starting job. And there's 3 other teams, they may be crap, but there's 3 other teams that are saying that they're going to give it to you. It's hard at that point to then say, no, I'm actually going to compete for a job with a first-round draft pick. I think you'd much rather go somewhere else. But if you tell Malik Willis, hey, between us, you're the starting quarterback, or if you trade JJ McCarthy, and someone asked in the comments, I'm sorry, sometimes it flies by and I miss them, about trading McCarthy to one of these teams, the Jets or something. Sometimes when you get to this point in a young quarterback, as I mentioned with, Josh Rosen, you get to this point, or even Sam Darnold with the Jets, you do see a trade. And there might be teams who are like, hey, let's take a shot. And that's the type of crazy kind of stuff that is on the table now. When you've moved out your general manager, who I think we kind of understood everything that happened, and give Kwesi credit. Like, usually when he talked in public, he would lay it out there. Like, this is kind of what we're thinking. And I always felt like I really understood it, and I was able to convey it to you guys, and they did exactly what he said they were going to do. Through the whole time, the competitive rebuild, going to JJ, everything. They did everything that he said they were going to do the whole freaking time. It's kind of crazy like that. But now, we don't know. They could be working on a trade for McCarthy to send him somewhere right now. We do not know. They could be at the combine talking to Malik Willis's agent, not tampering. I mean, just bumping into him and then winking 14 times for the number of guaranteed $1 million or something at High Velocity, the hotel bar where everybody tends to show up. We don't know. We don't know how that's going to go. But if I'm another team with no quarterback whatsoever, I'm checking. You guys trading McCarthy, especially if people, around the league had high expectations for him. But I mean, after this, after Darnold won 14 games and McCarthy, it's hard to see other teams saying, yeah, definitely give us that for a second round draft pick or something. Adrian says, if KOC does stick with JJ, JJ has to feel the pressure that essentially his head coach's job is in his hands. Well, if he stays with McCarthy, I think that means that he believes that he's going to get another shot at a different quarterback. That's hard for me to believe is going to happen. But if he comes out and says, we're staying with JJ, we're bringing in Case Keenum as our backup quarterback to help him out, and not a competition really, which would be totally changing from where he said they were. But let's just go down that road. We're going to stay with him. We're going to bring in a real backup, and that's really it. Or Wentz coming back or something. Okay. Well, that means that it's not sink or swim. It's not live or die on this season. It's see what you can do. And if it doesn't work out, then you can go get another quarterback in the draft because you're our long-term coach. That would be very surprising based on history, but it's not impossible. The Magic Man says, I think that Kirk gives us a discount. Well, that's what Kirk has to understand. And look, I don't think it's a great idea to bring back Cousins. I think if you could have Cousins at a cheap price from 2020, where he was playing really well, then it would be great. But now, I mean, you're an Achilles tear. You're a couple years later into his career. The velocity on the ball wasn't great when he was playing in Atlanta. It just doesn't seem like a very high ceiling type of move to bring back Kirk. But if you're Kirk now, how much more money do you need? And I know, like, your agent's got a job, and holy cow, is he good at that job. But how much more do you need? Like, if you're Cousins, you should come back here on a very cheap, like 1 year, $10 million with a void year that makes this year's cap hit 5, 3, whatever it is. Darnold had some sort of deal like that where I think it had like a void year on it to lower the cap hit for 2024. I didn't forget how it went. The point just being, Darnold being paid $10 million did help the Minnesota Vikings win those 14 games. And if Kirk is willing to do that and compete with McCarthy, I don't think it's the craziest thing I've ever heard. I mean, Ron says, when was the last time Kyler Murray played an entire season? See, this is my favorite part about Kyler Murray. Absolutely none of you watched ever any Kyler Murray. I promise you didn't. Other than on Red Zone, you have seen none of Kyler Murray. If he was in this room, you wouldn't recognize him outside of he's maybe the shortest guy. 2024, and he went 8-9 and had a really good overall season. He beat the Rams 41-10 in that season. Threw for 3,800 yards, 21 touchdowns, 11 picks, 520 yards rushing, 93 quarterback rating or something. A season that easily would have had the Minnesota Vikings with like 12 wins this year. I'm just saying, like, sometimes people act like Kyler Murray's like the worst, most offensive quarterback they've ever heard of. I bet you talked the same way about Sam Darnold before he arrived here. And I'm not saying it's the same. And I know that his personality is not always something that is gelled very well. I also know that their head coaches were very inexperienced and not particularly great. And their franchise sucks. It's like the worst franchise in the league that's not Cleveland. They get rated horribly by the NFLPA. Their owner just, at least from some of the reporting out there, tells their coach he's safe and then fires him like the next day. I don't know. Did they have Jefferson? Well, when they did, he had his best season and went 9-5 as a starter. But dude, it was just last year and they benched him so they could tank. He was, I'm sure, healthy enough. So like, let's at least try to get the facts right. If you don't like Kyler Murray as an idea, that's fine. I'm not offended by that. The personality and the leadership in the locker room, it matters. The height is a factor. He hasn't been a good downfield thrower in years. That's a factor. But he actually did get the ball out quickly more than you think. And was really in 2024, he's the 12th ranked PFF quarterback. Like, I don't know, if you had the 12th ranked quarterback, you might be pretty good. So I would not say that he's never been healthy. And I would not say that there's no chance he can make the playoffs. He has. Or that he can lead a good offense. He has. Or that he could get the ball to a number one receiver. He has. It's really, is it worth it with Murray? Is he going to fit? Is he going to fit the offense? And he has been hurt. So if he gets hurt, then are you just back to JJ McCarthy? If he doesn't fit with the locker room, does it take apart what you've built there? Like, yeah. I mean, K-Skull says, who's the starter you're bringing in? I mean, for me, it would be Malik Willis if you could convince him, but it probably would be Kyler Murray because there's a lot of things that match up with Kyler Murray and Sam Darnold. High draft picks with a ton of talent that have won some games before and shown they can play in the league, but are down on their luck in part because of very bad franchises and probably not the best coaching and definitely not the best supporting casts. And you have to keep in mind when you think about the personality and all that, I'm talking a 1-year deal with the veteran minimum, and it would have to work in the way that he has the offsetting in his contract where he's getting cut. Arizona's footing the bill. You're paying him almost nothing and then see what happens. At least I think it would be fun. At least I think it would be exciting because none of these options scream to me Lombardi, but that one screams to me might be crazy. And if you're giving me the option, here's a guy who's made the playoffs before. Here's a guy who's had a recent really good season and it might be crazy. So I'd probably do that. But, you know, I mean, the best option is what? Out of all those, like, what's the best option out of all those? Is it, Mac Jones, whatever? I mean, Malik Willis is interesting to me if you could convince him, but I think the one that gives you the best chance to actually have one of those surprise pop-up seasons, like, isn't Kyler Murray Jeff George with a lot of talent? Now, it's not the same arm, but like a lot of talent, but a guy that nobody seemed to get along with. Give him a couple of receivers and he flourishes. I don't know. We've seen that a couple times before, Vikings history. Jim says, I don't buy that JJ McCarthy is under more pressure than anyone of us. If you lose your FanDuel sponsorship and no subscribers after 2 years, do you still cover the Vikings? I think I understand the metaphor there. Like all quarterbacks, all people in the NFL, it's year to year. I think I understand what you're saying. Like with all reporters, I guess it's year to year in journalism as well. If this year you guys decided you didn't want to watch or listen anymore, I wouldn't be doing this. So I understand. Yeah, totally. It's actually probably the way everything works is year to year in general. But he has the pressure of his career feeling like it's at the precipice right now, which I don't feel like is true for Old Purple Insider. Also, I proved I can do it over 10 years. JJ McCarthy's still proven that he can even be here in the league as a starter. That's a lot of pressure. If your head coach is under the gun and you are coming into training camp thinking if I lose this job that I don't know that I'll ever get another chance at it. A lot of quarterbacks like Blaine Gabbert, who was a very similar quarterback to JJ McCarthy, he never got to start again after it went sideways with the Jags. It sneaks up on you. It happens fast. Adrian, if the Vikings don't make the playoffs, are we sure KOC is going to get another crack at drafting a quarterback? That's the big question. That is the big question. The Wilfs have not been patient with that, with missing the playoffs. I tend to lean toward no. I tend to lean toward you got to make the playoffs at least next year. But doing it that way seems so, I don't know. It's so football. It's just so football. All of this stuff with Kwesi and firings and everything else, isn't it all just so football? Like if you take this stuff outside of this world and went to, I don't know, Wall Street, if you just went to like an insurance office or something and you laid this out and those people didn't know anything about football, and you're like, here's how they do it. They'd be like, really? If a guy makes the playoffs, he's in, and if he doesn't, he's out. But what if he's just good and they had things go? No, that's how it works. Okay. They just, they let a guy go scout players and talk to agents and start working on the next year and then just fired him. Oh, okay. Because if you were in insurance or other business, they would look long-term, but in football, it's too intense. They can't do it. Let's see. Is this, Mauricio says, disagree with Adofo-Mensah being good with analytics. Every single trade he made was a net negative according to analytic models. I don't know that that's true. Every trade? No, I don't think that that's true. Even the 2022 draft trade, some analytic models liked it and some didn't, which actually is really a trend of like analytics in general, where we're getting so much data that you go, okay, this model likes it. This person's chart likes him. This person's doesn't. It actually is, we're getting so much data that it can be a little bit frustrating to figure out like who's right. Cause we kind of had Football Outsiders and PFF for a long time, but now we got all this other flood of data. What do you do with it exactly? And those draft charts are part of it. So some liked that trade in 2022. Some didn't. What other trades are we talking? Trading down in the third, taking Ty Felton and getting a little extra draft capital? Or is it like a Jordan Mason? If you're talking about the Turner one, the Dallas Turner one, yeah, absolutely. But that was the thing about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and his time with the Minnesota Vikings, is that it never felt like it really. Now, I have spoken to this man about analytics, so this is where you and I are a little different. So I know, having written a book on it, right? I know when someone else knows what they're talking about, because it's something I've studied now for 10 years. However, that doesn't mean that the moves made up for it, or made it that way, that the moves matched up. That was the point I was making, I think, when I said I know he knows analytics, because I know him. But did the moves match up? That I would say they did not. I think they often did not. So your point there is correct. They often did not. Adrian, what happened to the collaboration the front office was hooting and hollering about? Hooting and hollering is good. I like that. The Magic Man, Kwesi, was the fall guy for the front office collective sins and coaching staff. Yep. Dr. Smug, JJ's passer rating was over 100 for the last 4 games. That's great. If anything worked that way, that would be great. But nothing works that way. If you hit 100 for 5 months in baseball, and then in October you hit 300, you are not a 300 hitter. If you put up 100 quarterback rating against Dallas, who fired their defensive coordinator, Washington, who fired their defensive coordinator, the Giants, who fired their defensive coordinator, and the Packers, who weren't trying, I don't think anybody's really looking at that stat and saying that's a good way to evaluate it. Rach says, I am increasingly of the opinion that the Wolves are a major impediment to a true Super Bowl contention. This team has won 3 playoff games in 20 years. Not resolving the quarterback situation is what it always comes back to, doesn't it? I know what you're saying. And I've always thought they have a really excellent leadership and ownership when it comes to, the building, the TCO Performance Center, how people are treated, that sort of thing. But there's certainly, from a football perspective, not ever being able to solidify that quarterback position. That's the cause of not having multiple swings at it. And that's why you get that one swing every few years. And really, Seattle's kind of got that right now. They just got there with their swing and the Vikings haven't. Doomer KO says, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah moving on from aging veterans like Dalvin Cook are still good moves. That was the best stuff he did. That was the best stuff that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah did, was setting up for that future cap situation, because you don't have Van Ginkel, Grenard, all the guys that they were able to bring in, and some of the extensions they were able to give, if you mess up the cap by trying to keep those guys. That was smart. So anyway, well, sorry I didn't get to every single one of these. We got some more podcasts that are on the way for tomorrow that I got to record, so don't want to use all of the voice, but hopefully if I missed your question, we'll have plenty of time. A lot more of these chats are on the way. Scheduled in the near future with Arif Hassan for a pod, for Eric Edholm from NFL.com. Sean Syed from Sumer Sports later in the week, I think, is going to drop by. And then we'll do a little Super Bowl trivia later on. So a lot still to come. But we'll definitely be live again. I'm thinking probably Wednesday night. So thanks everybody for dropping by. It's been a great conversation as always. And we'll catch y'all.